The demon's embrace. Mr. Bin lived with his only son, Trong, a successful young man with a bright future. Although he had been working for years, Trong preferred staying with his father rather than living independently. He had a habit of taking evening walks and always returned home before 9 p.m. But one night the clock struck 11 and Trong was still nowhere to be seen. Calls went unanswered. Just as Mr. Bin was about to go out and look for him, he heard the sound of the front door unlocking. Trong walked in, soaking wet, with empty, soulless eyes. Without greeting his father, he headed straight to his room, something he had never done before. When Mr. Bin closed the door behind him, he felt something wet and sticky on his hands. A foul, metallic stench filled the air. Looking at his palm, he saw a thick, black sludge clinging to his skin. That night, Mr. Bin lay awake in bed, hearing whispering voices coming from Trong's room. Not one, but many voices speaking at once. By midnight, the murmuring grew louder, filled with eerie laughter. "Trong, it's midnight! What are you doing in there? Turn off the radio and go to sleep." There was no response. But suddenly, the voices stopped. Silence filled the air, except for the occasional buzzing of mosquitoes. The next morning, Mr. Bin woke up to find Trong already outside, sitting motionless in the yard, his lips moving without sound. A long, dried bloodstain stretched across the ground beneath him. Terrified, Mr. Bin noticed drops of fresh blood dripping from Trong's hand. But what made his blood run cold was the black cat cradled in Trong's lap, its neck grotesquely twisted. Trong looked up and smiled oddly. "I'm fine, Dad. This cat kept meowing all night, so I snapped its neck." Mr. Bin shuddered. Trong had always loved animals, and yet last night he hadn't heard any cat meowing. That evening, Trong came home again, his clothes tattered and soaked in blood. Without a word, he went straight to his room. Mr. Bin could no longer stay silent. What did he kill this time? As the night deepened, the eerie whispering returned. But before Mr. Bin could react, he was startled by a piercing cat scream from the rooftop. "No, that black cat is dead. It can't be." Grabbing a broom, he rushed upstairs to drive away whatever was lurking there. But when he stepped onto the rooftop, his eyes widened in horror. The grave where he had buried the black cat had been dug up. A deep, empty hole remained. Heart pounding, he stumbled back inside and slammed the door shut. But when he turned around, the black cat was there, sitting on the couch. Its head twisted backward, eyes locked onto his. Mr. Bin screamed and collapsed. The next morning, desperate for help, he sought out Father Hui Lei, a well-respected priest in the local church. "Father, my son is possessed by a demon." That night, Father Hui Lei and his fellow priests secretly observed Trong. At exactly midnight, they witnessed him kneeling before a strange piece of skin covered in arcane markings, chanting in an unknown tongue while gnawing on a large sewer rat. A team of men rushed in, bound Trong in sacred ropes, and took him to the church for an exorcism. Inside a candle-lit chamber, Father Hui Lei confronted the entity inside Trong. "Tell me, demon, what is your name?" Trong let out a chilling laugh before hissing, "I am Envy." The priest chanted prayers and poured holy water over Trong, forcing the demon out. After a long, grueling battle, Trong collapsed. By morning, he seemed to be back to his old self, cheerfully talking to his father as if nothing had happened. But later that day, while cleaning Trong's car, Mr. Bin made a horrifying discovery. A woman's corpse was stuffed inside the trunk. Her body was covered in bruises, her face frozen in terror. Next to her lay a crumpled note. "A filthy whore who thrived on beauty and deceit. You deserve to die." Shaken, Mr. Bin dug up part of the garden and found another buried corpse. It wasn't the demon that killed them, it was Trong. This time, instead of seeking the priest, he turned to an old Taoist exorcist named Master Huan. At midnight, Master Huan snuck into Trong's room, pressing a yellow talisman onto his forehead. But before he could begin the ritual, Trong suddenly opened his pitch-black eyes and growled, "Your God is not my God." With inhuman strength, he ripped Master Huan's arm clean off. The exorcist shrieked in agony, stumbling out of the house, leaving his severed limb behind. Trong stood in the darkness, eyes gleaming. Mr. Bin, watching from a crack in the door, knew he was next. He heard footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate. "Dad, are you asleep?" Mr. Bin held his breath. "Dad, I know you're awake. I also know that it was you who tried to get rid of me. A long pause, then a low chuckle. Do you know why I let you live, Dad? Trong's voice was soft, almost affectionate. Because you helped me hide the bodies. But now you've gone too far. A surge of terror overtook Mr. Bin. His heart pounded violently until it stopped altogether. When Trong opened the door, he found his father sitting lifelessly in his chair. He smiled and whispered, "Oh, you're already dead, but I still had so much to tell you." Then he let out a crazed laugh. That night, the house burned to the ground. A lone figure drove away in a black car, his dark eyes gleaming in the rearview mirror. And in the days that followed, bodies continued to appear. At every crime scene, there was always a single note left behind. Your God is not my God.